Abandoned baby found in a junkyard by a horse. What happens next will shock you. The dawn broke softly over the neglected countryside, painting the junkyard in hues of amber and rose. Once a bustling haven for machines and industry, the junkyard had become a forgotten corner of the world. Rusted car frames stood like ancient monuments, their jagged edges softened by creeping ivy. Wildflowers burst defiantly through cracks in the asphalt, their delicate petals a testament to life, finding a way in the most unexpected places. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a bird perched on a broken hood, as if standing watch over this land of forgotten relics. In this strange, melancholic landscape wandered Shadow, a lone palomino. His golden coat, though dulled by the grime of years, glistened faintly in the morning light, a reminder of the majestic champion he had once been. Shadow had been a star on the racetrack, a name whispered with awe and admiration, but time had stolen his speed, and with it the attention and love of those who once adored him. Now, discarded like the rusted machines around him, Shadow roamed the junkyard, searching for scraps of food and companionship among the silence. As Shadow moved through the maze of debris, his sharp ears twitched. A faint sound carried on the breeze, a high-pitched, wavering cry that didn't belong to the familiar symphony of the junkyard. His movements stilled, his dark eyes scanning the horizon with intent. The cry came again, weak but persistent, tugging at something deep within him. Shadow's heart quickened as he turned toward the sound, his curiosity and concern melding into a single, driving purpose. The old horse trotted toward the source of the cries, his hooves crunching softly on the gravel. The sound grew louder, more desperate, guiding him to a secluded corner of the junkyard. Here, the chaos was at its peak. Piles of discarded metal, shattered glass, and tangled wires formed a nearly impenetrable barrier. Shadow hesitated for only a moment before lowering his head and nudging the debris aside with determined care. There, beneath the shadow of a broken car hood, lay the source of the cries. A tiny baby, wrapped in a tattered, dirt-streaked blanket, squirmed helplessly on a bed of rusted scraps. Her face was red and tear-streaked, her cries piercing the air like a plea to the universe. Her tiny fists waved weakly, as if reaching for someone, anyone, to hold her. Shadow froze, his large eyes fixed on the baby. For a moment he didn't move, as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Then something stirred in him, an instinct older than memory. He stepped closer, his breath warm and soft, as it brushed over the baby's face. Her cries softened at his touch, her small hands grasping at the air before landing on the velvety fur of his muzzle. The connection was instant, profound. Shadow lowered his head further, nudging the baby gently with his nose, as if to reassure her. The baby gurgled softly, her tear-streaked face relaxing into something close to trust. Shadow, once a creature discarded and forgotten, now stood as a protector to this tiny, fragile life. Above them, the sky began to shift. Clouds gathered rapidly, their edges tinged with an ominous gray. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Shadow's ears flicked toward the horizon. A storm was coming, fast and unforgiving. He glanced back at the baby, her small form shivering slightly as the wind whipped through the junkyard. Shadow acted with a swiftness born of urgency. He lowered his head and carefully grasped the edge of the baby's blanket with his teeth. With deliberate, measured movements, he began to drag her toward a distant structure. A crumbling shed that had stood defiant against time and weather. The journey was fraught with challenges. Shadow had to navigate the uneven terrain, each step a calculated effort to avoid jostling the fragile bundle. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and relentless, as he reached the shed. Shadow stepped inside, his large frame barely fitting through the doorway, and gently nudged the baby into the driest corner. He pawed at the ground, arranging the scattered hay into a makeshift bed, then stood over her, his golden body a shield against the wind and rain that now howled through the gaps in the walls. The storm raged outside, thunder shaking the earth and lightning splitting the sky. Inside the shed, the baby lay safe and warm, her tiny breaths steady and soft. Shadow stood sentinel, his dark eyes fixed on the small life he had found. The rhythmic patter of rain on the tin roof filled the space like a soothing lullaby, and the baby's eyelids fluttered shut in peaceful slumber. For Shadow, the junkyard had always been a place of survival, a realm of decay and forgotten dreams. But now it had become something more, a place of unexpected miracles, where a discarded horse and an abandoned baby had found each other. As the storm roared on, Shadow stood tall, his spirit reignited by the profound purpose fate had placed in his path. As the storm raged outside, Shadow stood watch over the baby, his presence unwavering and steadfast. The rain pounded against the shed, but the old horse remained undeterred. His instincts, honed over a lifetime of challenges, kicked into overdrive. He could sense the fragility of the little one beside him, her survival now entwined with his. Shadow's once proud frame, now weathered and worn, moved with surprising agility as he worked to create a safe haven. He paced around the shed, searching for anything that could offer comfort. With each step, his hooves scraped across the floor, gathering dried hay and straw that had been left behind. He piled it carefully into a small nest, molding it into a makeshift cradle for the baby. As the rain continued to pour, Shadow instinctively positioned himself next to her, his warm, golden body acting as a shield against the cold. The storm outside may have been fierce, but inside the crumbling shed, the baby found warmth and comfort in the presence of her guardian. Shadow's breath, slow and steady, calmed her as she snuggled into the straw, oblivious to the tumultuous world outside. Throughout the night, the horse never strayed. He stood vigilant, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the shed, his ears flicking at every creak of the wood. Every so often he would nudge the baby gently, checking that she was safe. Shadow, the once forgotten Palomino, had become the child's protector, her silent guardian in a world that had left them both behind. The morning after the storm arrived in a muted haze, with gray clouds still hanging heavy in the sky. The junkyard, usually silent and forlorn, seemed different somehow. Its decay had taken on a new kind of sadness, one that lingered in the air. Jake, a solitary mechanic in his mid-40s, strode through the yard with his usual purposeful gait. His hands were rough from years of work, and his brow was permanently furrowed, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. Jake had inherited the junkyard from his father, and though he had the strength to carry the burden, the place had long since ceased to feel like home. As he walked past piles of discarded machinery, a sudden movement caught his eye. Shadow was acting strangely, pacing restlessly near the old shed. The horse, once a symbol of strength and pride, now seemed agitated, his movements erratic and anxious. Jake had seen the horse many times before, but never like this. He followed Shadow with a mixture of curiosity and concern, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached the shed. When Jake entered, his eyes took a moment to adjust to the dim light filtering through cracks in the walls. But it was the sight of the baby that stopped him cold. For a second, he thought he was imagining it. A tiny, helpless infant, lying amidst the hay, its tiny hands reaching out in search of warmth and comfort. His heart stuttered in disbelief. Was this some kind of cruel joke? Shadow, standing protectively over the baby, didn't seem to care about Jake's presence. His deep, knowing eyes fixed on the mechanic, as if daring him to make a move. Slowly, cautiously, Jake approached the cradle of hay. His heart pounded in his chest, an overwhelming mix of disbelief and outrage stirring within him. Who could do something like this? Abandon a child in such a way, leaving her to perish in a cold, forgotten junkyard? But as Jake kneeled beside the baby, his gaze softening, something inside him clicked. His hands trembled as he gently scooped the child into his arms, instinctively cradling her against his chest. She was warm, alive, and, despite the harsh circumstances, she was safe. For reasons he couldn't fully comprehend, Jake felt an overwhelming urge to protect this child. He had been alone for so long, buried in the weight of his responsibilities and the solitude of the junkyard. Yet, in this moment, he felt the stirrings of something deep inside, paternal instincts awakening, a bond forming between him and the little girl in his arms. Mystery deepens. As Jake settled the baby back into the hay, his eyes scanned the surrounding area, searching for answers. The junkyard had been silent for so long, but the discovery of this child felt like a rupture in the stillness. Where had she come from? Why was she left here to die? In the corner of the shed, half buried in the debris, Jake spotted something. A small, crumpled piece of paper. He reached for it, his hand shaking as he unfolded the note. It was brief, hastily written in faded ink, but its meaning was clear. "I am sorry. I have no choice. She is your future now. Please protect her." Jake's heart sank. The note offered no answers, only more questions. Who was this mysterious person? Why had they left the child in the junkyard? And why had they trusted Shadow, of all beings, to protect her? The mystery of the abandoned baby deepened, but one thing was undeniable. This child needed someone to care for her, and Jake felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility to do so. With no other immediate options, Jake made a decision. He would take the baby in. At least for now. He gently lifted her once more, cradling her against his chest. "I'll take care of you," he whispered softly, more to himself than to the child. "I promise." He looked at Shadow, who stood quietly by his side, watching with silent understanding. The horse's presence seemed to reaffirm Jake's resolve. It was as if Shadow, in his own way, had already claimed the role of guardian, and Jake was simply stepping into the position of protector. The horse, once abandoned and forgotten, had found a new purpose. Jake didn't hesitate. The baby needed warmth, comfort, and care. He would name her Lila, something soft, something hopeful, a name that felt right in the depths of his heart. As Shadow stood by, ever watchful, Jake carried Lila back to his home, a small cabin at the edge of the junkyard. The mystery surrounding her would wait. Right now, all that mattered was that this fragile life had found refuge and a family in the most unlikely of places. And so, the bond between Jake, Shadow, and Lila began to form. A bond that would grow stronger with each passing day, entwining their fates forever. The storm hit without warning, sweeping through the junkyard with a violent intensity. The dark clouds roiled in the sky, casting an ominous shadow over the once serene landscape. The wind howled like a wild beast, tearing through the remnants of the old machinery and tossing debris into the air. It was no longer just a storm, it was a fury, intent on destroying everything in its path. In the midst of the chaos, a spark ignited in the corner of the yard. The dry, forgotten scraps of metal and old wood caught fire quickly, and within moments flames spread through the junkyard with terrifying speed. Jake, working on a nearby vehicle, was the first to notice. He rushed toward the flames, but his heart stopped when he realized what was at stake. Lila, The one person who had transformed his life was trapped inside the small shed where she had been playing. He could hear her cries, faint but unmistakable, rising above the roar of the storm. Without thinking, Jake raced toward the shed, but before he could reach her, something else moved first. Shadow, his old body worn and tired, dashed through the rain and the fire, his hooves pounding against the earth with a strength that defied his age. The horse's instincts kicked in. He couldn't let the child he had vowed to protect suffer. As the fire closed in on the shed, Shadow threw his body against the door, shattering it open. He nudged Lila toward safety, his own body burning with the heat from the flames, but he refused to leave her side. With one final, determined push, Shadow managed to drag Lila out of the burning wreckage, collapsing just outside the shed, his strength fading in the process. Jake arrived moments later, his heart in his throat, and found Lila in Shadow's protective embrace. The horse lay there, smoke curling around his body, his once bright coat singed and covered in ash. He had saved her, but at a great cost. His breathing was shallow, and his movements slow as he tried to lift his head, his eyes meeting Jake's with a quiet, unspoken plea. For a long moment, Jake stood frozen, the weight of everything they had been through together crashing down on him. Then, tears welling in his eyes, he dropped to his knees beside the horse, pulling Lila into his arms and whispering words of gratitude and love to Shadow. "You did it. You saved her," Jake murmured, stroking the horse's mane gently, as if trying to offer comfort in return. Shadow's eyes flickered, then closed, his breathing labored but steady. The bond between them was now unbreakable. A man, a horse, and a child, united by love and sacrifice. Shadow had given everything for the ones he loved, and Jake knew, without a doubt, that he would never let the horse down. They were a family, forged by the flames of hardship and sealed with a promise to protect each other. The aftermath of the storm left the junkyard in ruins, but it was also the beginning of something new. The charred remains of the old shed and broken machinery were cleared away, replaced by fresh growth and hope. Jake worked tirelessly to rebuild, not just the structures, but the life he had started with Lila and Shadow. The junkyard, once a place of abandonment, now stood as a sanctuary. The air, once filled with the rusting scent of neglect, was now infused with the sounds of laughter, healing, and possibility. In the following weeks, Jake fought a battle of a different sort, one that would determine whether Lila could remain with him permanently. Authorities, having investigated the missing child report, conducted a thorough review of Jake's ability to care for Lila. It wasn't easy. He had to prove that he could provide a stable, loving environment for her. But with the help of Shadow, whose heroic actions had spoken louder than any words, Jake was granted temporary custody of Lila, with the possibility of permanent guardianship if he could continue to demonstrate his commitment to her well-being. Though the victory was bittersweet, as it came only after countless struggles and sacrifices, Jake knew that he had won something far more precious than just a legal battle. He had proven to himself, and to the world, that family wasn't about blood. It was about love, resilience, and the willingness to protect those who need it most. As for Shadow, though his body bore the scars of his heroism, his spirit remained unbroken. His injuries, while severe, gradually healed with time, and he regained some of his strength. He was slower now, but every time Lila ran toward him with arms outstretched, Shadow's eyes sparkled with the joy of knowing that he had done what he had set out to do, protect the child who had become his own. And so, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, a new chapter began. The junkyard, once a symbol of abandonment, had transformed into a vibrant sanctuary, a place where love and resilience thrived. Jake, Lila, and Shadow, each of them scarred in their own way, had found something truly remarkable. A family in the most unlikely of places. The years had passed, and the junkyard that had once been a symbol of abandonment was now a place of life, love, and hope. What had been left behind, forgotten by society, had been reclaimed and transformed by the bond between a man, a child, and a horse. Lila, once a fragile infant swaddled in a tattered blanket, had blossomed into a vibrant, spirited young girl. Her laughter filled the air, and her eyes sparkled with the boundless curiosity of childhood. She was no longer the abandoned child left to the mercy of the world. She was loved, cherished, and thriving under the care of Jake and the steadfast protection of Shadow. Jake, once a solitary, grizzled mechanic, now carried a warmth in his heart that could not be denied. The once bitter, lonely man had rediscovered purpose through his role as a father to Lila and as a caretaker of Shadow, the horse who had brought them together. His face had softened with time, the lines of worry replaced by smiles of genuine happiness. The healing of his past traumas was evident in the way he looked at Lila, in the tenderness with which he cared for Shadow, and in the quiet pride he held in his heart as he watched them both grow. Shadow, though his body had grown older and slower with time, was still the same noble guardian he had always been. His once bright coat had faded, and his legs bore the marks of a life well lived. Yet there was a spark in his eyes that had never dimmed. He stood tall and strong, still watching over Lila with the same unwavering loyalty he had shown that fateful day when he had saved her from the flames. His love for her, for this family he had chosen, was evident in every step he took, no matter how weary his bones became. The junkyard had undergone a similar transformation. What was once a place of desolation now thrived with new life. Flower beds bloomed where rusting cars had once sat, and the air was filled with the gentle hum of nature reclaiming its space. The old shed where Lila had been trapped by the fire had been replaced by a sturdy, loving home where memories were made, laughter echoed, and the scent of fresh food and flowers mixed in the air. On this particular evening, as the sun began to set over the junkyard, the trio gathered in the now flourishing space. The soft orange glow of the sunset bathed everything in a warm light, casting long shadows across the yard, and the cool evening breeze whispered through the trees. The air was filled with the gentle sounds of crickets and the rustle of leaves. Peaceful and serene, a far cry from the chaos they had once known. Lila, her arms wrapped around Shadow's neck, leaned against the old horse as they watched the sunset together. Shadow nuzzled her gently, his warm breath falling on her cheek. Jake stood nearby, a proud smile on his face as he watched the bond between the two. His heart swelled with love, not just for Lila, but for the horse who had become so much more than a pet. He was family. For a moment, everything stood still. There were no more worries about the past, no more fear of what tomorrow might bring. They had made it through the hardest times, and here they were, together, strong and united. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the yard in twilight, Jake joined them. He placed his arm around Lila's shoulders, pulling her close as they both leaned against Shadow, the horse's steady presence grounding them. "This is our family," Jake said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. "We've found each other, and no matter what comes, we'll always have each other." Lila smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the golden glow of the setting sun. "And we'll always have Shadow," she said, her voice filled with an unspoken promise. The three of them, bound by love, stood there in the fading light, a family in the truest sense. No matter how unconventional their journey had been, no matter the hardships they had endured, They had found something far more precious than anyone could have ever imagined. A family formed in the most unexpected of places, united by love, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. And as the last rays of sunlight disappeared, they stood together, knowing that no matter what the future held, they would face it as a family. What do you think makes a family? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more heartwarming stories that will inspire and touch your soul.